Some of you will know the film of The Man Who Never Was. Some of you may even have read the book The Man Who Never Was, published in the 1950s. It was written by a man called Ewan Montague, who was a wartime intelligence officer and a barrister and latterly a judge. And it's a wonderful tale, but I won't give it away yet. But in one of his later books, Montague wrote that he had been allowed to keep certain documents from the Second World War. Now, as anybody who's worked in intelligence knows, the one thing you're not allowed to do with intelligence documents is to keep them. So it struck me at this point that if he had kept them immediately after the war, he probably still had them. He died in 1986. I went to see his son, Jeremy Montague, who is a very distinguished professor of musical instruments at Oxford. And I asked Jeremy whether his father had left any documents behind, and with an unmistakable twinkle he said, "Ah, it's funny you should mention that." And we went upstairs, and underneath the bed, in a very dusty trunk, were tied together a whole series of MI5 and MI6 documents, tied up with a string on which were written "top secret." Now, if that sounds completely unlikely, it is nonetheless true, like everything else in this strange story. The good judge, had in fact stolen the entire cache of Operation Mincemeat, and that is the trove on which this story is based. Now, Operation Mincemeat was one of the most successful and certainly the oddest deception operation carried out in the whole of the Second World War. Its origins, in fact, lie with a novelist whose name I suspect is probably obscure even in this literary company. His name was Basil Thomson. He had been a personal tutor to the King of Siam, Premier of Tonga. He had also been a spy catcher in the First World War, and he ended up running CID, the Criminal Investigation Division, but he was also a detective novelist. He wrote 23 very bad detective novels, including one in 1938, which contained a scene in which a body is found in a barn in the middle of the night, and through brilliant deduction, Inspector Richardson works out that the body is not the body that it appears to be, that all the documents on it have been falsified. Now, this novel was justly and rightly forgotten immediately the moment it was published, except by one person, whose name was Ian Fleming, who kept this novel by Basil Thomson, and in 1939 was appointed assistant to the head of naval intelligence. Now, in 1939, just very soon after the start of the war, Fleming and his boss wrote something called the Trout Memo, which is a critical piece of intelligence forward planning, which contained 53 suggestions for bamboozling the enemy at sea. They included such extraordinary ideas as painting footballs filled with explosives in luminous paint so that U-boats would pick them up, and the equally bizarre idea that they would plant false stories in the Times, as if such a thing was possible. Suggestion number 23, which is a suggestion brackets not a very nice one, was let's get a body, let us give it a completely false identity, and let us ship it somewhere where the Germans will find it equipped with these false documents. Brackets, this comes from a novel by Basil Thomson. So that's where it started. This idea lay dormant for 4 years until it was picked up by an MI5 officer called Charles Chumley. Everybody in this story, by the way, is called things like Chumley and Montague, and tremendously complicated moustaches. Chumley hit on this idea and suggested they put it into practice. So he and Montague were then detailed to make it work. Now, they had assumed that getting hold of a dead body in the middle of a war would be easy. In fact, it was tremendously difficult. Because the right sort of body was very hard to get. They had to find a body that would look as if it had drowned at sea or had otherwise died in an air crash. And to this end, they recruited a splendid man by the name of Sir Bentley Purchase, who was the coroner of St Pancras, who had access to a lot of fresh corpses, and agreed completely against the law to obtain one of them for Montague and Chumley. This is an example where the rule of law really didn't work. And sure enough, at the beginning of 1943, Bentley Purchase contacted Montague and said he was the perfect candidate for the job. Now, a very quick strategic overview. At this point, the Allied troops are massed in North Africa, preparing to invade southern Europe. It is clear, as Churchill said to anybody with an atlas, that we must be aiming for Sicily. So the point of the deception was to try to convince the Germans that instead of attacking Sicily, which of course we would do, the Allied troops were aiming for Greece in the eastern Mediterranean and Sardinia in the west. So that's the central crux of what became Operation Mincemeat. Now, having obtained the body, which they duly did, which had belonged to, I suppose did still belong to a man called Glendower Michael, who had died of ingesting rat poison in a disused warehouse in Kingston. His story is a tragic one, which has really never been told before. Having obtained the body, they decided they needed to invest it with a completely new personality. So they turned it from Glendower Michael into Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. He was equipped with letters from his father, identity papers, a new uniform, and critically they decided that what he really needed was a love life. As you can tell from this, both Montagu and Cholmondeley had read an awful lot of romantic fiction. And at this point, the deception began to go completely over the top. They held, and I think this is unique in intelligence history, they held a top-secret beauty contest, bowels of the Admiralty, in which secretaries from MI5 and MI6 were invited to submit photographs of themselves in bathing gear, which could then be included in the wallet of the dead man. Now, I'm sorry to say this has already rigged this competition, because Montagu had a particular secretary in mind. Her name is Jean Gerard Lee. She is still around, I'm delighted to say, and she duly produced a photograph which won the competition. Then they decided they needed some letters to go with it, some love letters, and these are brilliant pastiches of 1940s romance. They contain, they're filled with love and foreboding, and they're written by this a brilliant kind of impression of a rather dippy secretary. So having created this personality, they then decided that they had to try and fabricate the central letters that would convince the Germans that we were in fact about to attack Greece. And these are brilliant, brilliant works, really, because without stating explicitly what was going on, they couldn't obviously include full plans of what was going to happen. They clearly indicate two areas in Greece where the Allies are aiming for. The body was then dressed in its clothes. There was only one slight hiccup, which was that the feet had frozen. And it is impossible to get a boot on unless you can bend the feet. So the good Benji purchase obtained a single bar heater, and they thawed out the ankles above the motor, and then loaded the body into a specially constructed double-hulled canister, which was loaded onto a submarine in Holyloch in Scotland. In one of the torpedo tubes. It was not, I'm delighted to say, shot out of the torpedo tube. In late April 1943, it was taken to the coast of Huelva in Spain, where they knew that a particular German spy was operating on that coast of Spain. And at the end of April 1943, the body was taken from its canister, dressed in a Mae West life jacket, a briefcase containing the key documents was attached to it by a chain, and the body of Glendower Michael was shipped off in the morning light on April the 23rd, 1943. Did it work? I'm afraid you'll have to book. All I can say is that in 1996, the government accidentally revealed the identity of the man who never was. And in a rather touching tribute to him, there is a small addendum to his marble tombstone in Spain. The main bit reads, Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, but at the bottom is a little addendum which reads, Glendower Michael served as William Martin. Thank you very much.